Welcome everyone to Travel to Serpentine webinar. I'm Annie Trowbridge, Deputy Director at the Center for Architecture. This event is part of our October virtual Travel to series in partnership with Bloomberg Connects. The Travel to series seeks to highlight Bloomberg Connects partners that feature iconic architecture and historically significant sites across the United States and around the world. Curators, preservationists, historians, and more bring these places and spaces to life for you to enjoy from the comfort of your home or office. Stay tuned for more exciting Travel to programs to be announced later this year. A quick word about the free Bloomberg Connects app, which you can download on your mobile device if you haven't done so yet. The app features our October guide, which for anyone who's interested is connecting with architecture and design in New York. Whether you are an architectural historian, a design enthusiast, a student, or someone having their first architecture experience, the October Guide is designed to help you explore notable contemporary and historical sites across New York City's 5 boroughs. Find it on the Bloomberg Connects app. Today, we are excited to be virtually traveling to Serpentine Pavilion 2025, titled A Capsule in Time by Marina Tabassum Architects. This afternoon, we'll be hearing from Hans-Ulrich Obrist, Artistic Director at Serpentine in London and a Senior Advisor at Luma Arliss. Marina Tabassum, founder of Marina Tabassum Architects and the designer behind the Serpentine Pavilion 2025. After Hans and Marina talk, we'll be joined by Chris Bailey, Exhibitions Curator at Serpentine, who will be answering questions in a live Q&A. Feel free to submit your questions through the presentation via the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. A little bit about our speakers. Chris Bailey is a curator and writer based in London, the United Kingdom. He's currently exhibitions curator at Serpentine, where he has worked on exhibitions and accompanying publications, including Serpentine Pavilion 2025, A Capsule in Time, and Judy Chicago Revelations, to name the most recent two. Previously, he held a position as assistant curator at Barbican, authoring and editing publications for many projects such as Carolee Schneemann Body Politics in 2022. Additionally, he's associate curator at Vitrine London from 2014 to 2024 and has worked on exhibitions with many artists. His writing has been published in numerous books, articles, and magazines. Hans-Ulrich Obrist is the artistic director of Serpentine in London and the senior advisor at Luma Arliss. Prior to this, he was a curator at Musée de l'Art Moderne and de la Villa Paris. Since his first show, World Soup, the kitchen show in 1991, he's curated more than 350 exhibitions. Among his awards, he most recently received the Prix Francois Morlet in 2025. Obrist's recent publications include Remember to Dream from 2023, World Building, Gaming and Art in the Digital Age in 2024, and A Life in Progress in 2025. Marina Tabassum is an acclaimed architect and educator who received numerous international recognitions for her contributions to the field of architecture. Tabassum is a founding partner of a Dhaka-based firm Urbana between 1995 and 2005 with Kashif Chowdhury. Then in 2005, she founded MTA. Tabassum's pursuit of architecture of relevance has led to multiple prize-winning projects, academic accomplishments, and inclusion in publications and exhibitions around the world. Tabassum chairs the executive board for Prokriti, a fair trade organization that promotes craft and provides livelihood to thousands of women artisans in Bangladesh. She is a founding chairperson of Foundation for Architecture and Community Equality, a nonprofit organization that focuses on climate adaptation and architecture's agency and responsibility in providing dignified living conditions for marginalized populations. As a reminder, please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'm pleased to welcome Chris Bailey to the virtual stage.
Thank you so much, Annie, for that wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in, wherever you are, morning, afternoon. My name is Chris Bailey, and I'm an exhibitions curator at Serpentine in London, and I've had the joy to work with this year's pavilion architect, Marina Tabassum. I thought that this would be useful at the beginning because we're obviously virtually coming to Serpentine, although I'm physically here. And I wanted to maybe just briefly introduce the Serpentine to those that might not be familiar with us. We are a free contemporary art institution located across 2 sites, and we're nestled in the heart of Kensington Gardens in West London. Our original building, Serpentine South, initially served as a tea room and opened in 1970. And since then has presented a wide range of emerging and acclaimed artists, most recently from Barbara Chase Rabu to Judy Chicago, Yinka Shonobare, Lauren Halsey, Sondra Perry, and P. Staff, just to name a few. Our second gallery opened in 2013, Serpentine North, and it's a former gunpowder store. And this building also includes an extension by the late Zaha Hadid, which houses our restaurant. So that just gives you a bit of an insight into our galleries. We're relatively small in scale, often working very closely with artists. We're an artist-led organization. And by way of introducing our pavilion, which started in 2000, this started with our former director, Julia Peyton-Jones, who invited the architect Zaha Hadid to design the first pavilion. And it really builds on Serpentine's long-standing history of artist commissions that have really included radical interventions within and beyond the gallery walls. It continues to offer audiences really this first-hand opportunity to witness and engage with the work of internationally renowned and emerging architects who, at the time of Serpentine's invitation, have not completed a structure in England. And this pavilion series has really become an international site for architectural experimentation, and really gives our audiences, both internationally and within London, this kind of unparalleled opportunity to experience the richness of contemporary architecture in built form rather than through models or drawings, plans, or photographic documentation. In recent years, for any of you that might have followed this program, it's grown to become a kind of hugely anticipated showcase for emerging architectural talent. In previous years, we've worked with the likes of Frank Gehry to Rem Koolhaas, Oscar Niemeyer, Francis Kere, to kind of younger emerging architectural practice such as Samaya Valley of Counterspace, Lena Gottme, or Ming Suk Chow of last year. By way of an introduction to Marina, which I know that Annie briefly touched on here, and before we listen to Marina and Hans-Ulrich speak, I wanted to just introduce Marina as of course this year's pavilion architect, the 24th practitioner to accept our invitation, together with her architectural firm MTA. And she was invited to design a temporary pavilion that sits on the east side of our Serpentine South lawn in Kensington Gardens between June and October of this year. And this year was a really exciting year because it marks 25 years since the commission started. And Marina is really celebrated for her work in establishing an architectural language that is both contemporary, but also deeply connected to a specific place, climate, context, culture, and history. And Tabassum and her firm over the past 10 years or so have completed a variety of architectural projects that are both socially, politically, and ecologically engaged. Their work is really underpinned by deep research and involvement with the communities that they serve, and these often result in an exchange of knowledge and skills. Her past projects have ranged from housing, community centres and refugee camps to mosques and museums. In addition to buildings that are predominantly sited in the city of Dhaka, its peripheries and across Bangladesh, Marina's practice extends to researching environmental degradation across Bangladesh, a country that is particularly vulnerable in this sense and is confronting the direct impacts of climate change. The studio also focuses on architecture's role in addressing conditions for marginalized individuals in the region, with the aim to uplift the environmental and living circumstances of the people with whom they collaborate with. And this is really demonstrated in their celebrated Kudibari project from 2020. These modular structures, which she devised together with her studio team and a number of geographers and critical thinkers, were developed for those that were living on the sandbeds of various rivers across Bangladesh and can be easily disassembled and relocated when those rising sea levels rise. Before we go into it with the Q&A, it's now my pleasure to virtually welcome Marina Tabassum and Hans-Ulrich Obrist, our artistic director, where the team will play a short video introduction and conversation between the two of them, which delves into her work and traces the research, development, and context behind this year's pavilion.
Hi everyone, we are here in Kensington Gardens at the Serpentine. We are in front of the 2025 Serpentine Pavilion. The scheme of the Serpentine Pavilion started in 2000 with the first pavilion of Zaha Hadid. In 2025, it's the architect Marina Tabassum, who is based in Dhaka in Bangladesh, whose practice we saw for the first time when we visited Dhaka in 2016. The amazing thing about Marina Tabassum's practice is the way how it responds to the environment, how it also serves many different communities. And when we met Marina first, she told us about her father being a doctor and how she really learned from him this idea of taking care, this idea of helping people. And she was always wondering, if architecture could do the same thing. And she has done that ever since. We were also very impressed by the way Marina addresses the climate emergency in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is very affected by flooding, and of course over the years and more recently with her Kudibari project she has developed amazing models of actually addressing that for the community. So she is one of the leading architects of our time. Marina's pavilion explores very much the sensory and also spiritual potential of architecture. It's playing with scale, with light, with shadow in a way that feels both grounded and also transcendent. It draws inspiration from the Shamiana tents of South Asia. And then of course, there is for the first time this kinetic aspect. We already had a pavilion on the move in 2006. Rem Koolhaas and Cecil Balmont created a balloon type structure which could actually on a sunny day elevate. This year, however, it's the first time that the pavilion can horizontally move. Many people actually walk into the pavilion without initially planning to visit an art or architecture exhibition. They just are in the park on a walk and it becomes part of their experience. And that leads us to the openness, because the openness of Marina's pavilion welcomes the possibilities of actually unifying visitors through conversations, through connections, through live programs and public convenings. So it's very important for us, this idea of bringing people together, because actually visitors can come to the Serpentine Pavilion without having to consume a coffee or a tea. They can just spend time here. There is a possibility always to have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, but there is no obligation to consume. So it is there, like the park. Everybody can just use it. We live in a context, I think, of a society where many people don't talk to each other. And we love this idea that the pavilion can bring people together. With Lina Gottme 2 years ago, it was à table. Lina created a table where strangers who had never met, who somehow happened to be in the park, can meet each other. Now with Marina Tabassum, it's these wonderful benches she created, long benches, where people can just hang out and spend time and engage in conversations. There are also books to read. It's maybe also important to mention that the pavilions have always got a second life. The pavilions are here in Kensington Gardens for the summer, and then the Serpentine Pavilion goes to another city where it has a second life and very often becomes permanent. That's of course very important in relation also to the resources, that no resources are wasted. Tabassum also really wants this pavilion in its second iteration after London to become a library. And of course the library is already here present because she brought some of her favorite books. And of course the pavilion, as always, is also a content machine. During the day, visitors find their own use of it, and very often in the evening we have events. There are lectures, there are readings. We have the park nights on Friday, where basically we have a whole series of performances, of takeovers. Basically artists take over the pavilion. This can be a talk, can be a performance, can be a film screening. If you want to know more about the Serpentine Pavilion of Marina Tabassum, if you want to know more about the exhibitions and the programs at Serpentine, if you want to know more about Giuseppe Pennone here at Serpentine South, inside and outside the gallery, and if you want to know more about Arpita Singh in Serpentine North, then go to Bloomberg Connect. Bloomberg Connect is the amazing app which gives, of course, all the information, the opening hours, but also gives you a lot of behind-the-scenes information. The idea of Bloomberg Connect is to basically make the visit more special by introducing the artist studio, by showing the thinking processes behind exhibitions. On Bloomberg Connect, you can follow the history of the pavilion, the 25 years, and you can see a lot of background information into the thinking of Marina Tabassum and what prompted her to design the pavilion as a time capsule here in the park, and also the way she works with time, because I think this aspect of time is very important. Robert Rauschenberg always said, that we need to think with art and architecture not only about space, but also about time. And for Marina Tabassum, that's very important, because we have, of course, the Serpentine South Gallery, which is a permanent building here in the park for more than 50 years. And then you have the pavilion, which is a temporary building, which is here from June to October. And she wants to reflect on these different temporalities. The capsule in time, Bloomberg Connects. It has only just begun. Thank you so much for watching, and we look very much forward to your visit at the Serpentine this summer. Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Hans-Ulrich Obis, Artistic Director of Serpentine, and together with Bettina Korek, our CEO, and all our teams, we are super delighted to welcome you all to a capsule in time, the 2025 Serpentine Pavilion, designed by the amazing Marina Tabassum and her Dhaka-based firm, Marina Tabassum Architects. We are joined today by Marina in conversation, and before we start, please give Marina a very, very warm welcome. There could not be a more beautiful day, really, to celebrate the pavilion and have the first public event here in this time capsule Marina design. Before we begin, a few thank yous. The Serpentine Pavilion has become one of the most anticipated architectural commissions in the world, and this year actually marks its 25th anniversary. It all began when Julia Peyton-Johns invited Zaha Hadid, the late Zaha Hadid, to design the first pavilion. And I think the pavilion of Marina very much is in the spirit of what Zaha taught us when she says that there should never ever be an end to experimentation. What is exciting is this is the first time Marina actually has built outside Bangladesh. We are very delighted that she has accepted this invitation. On behalf of our chairman, Mike Bloomberg, and the trustees, I want to again thank Marina. We are, of course, very deeply grateful to all our supporters whose commitment actually to our mission to build connections between art and audiences allows us to build these pavilions, but also to keep them open with free admission. As you can see, these structures never have doors. This one is particularly open and inviting everyone to come in and basically give a short talk for Art for All. This is kind of architecture for all. Now fast forward to July last year is when we called you about the Serpentine Pavilion, having been so impressed by the way you bring people together, encourage interactions, convenings, conversations through your architecture. So I wanted to ask you, now that we are in the pavilion, to tell us a little bit about your first ideas. I remember that from the very beginning you talked about time in the first conversation. The artist Robert Rauschenberg once told me that in art, we talk a lot about space, but you should talk about time more. Rauschenberg described his paintings to be clocks. Can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts when you got our phone call?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, when your first email came to us inviting us to take part in the competition, or let's say invited competition, it never reached us because we were in an internet blockout at that point, because we were in a mass uprising in a very difficult political situation in Bangladesh at that point. So when I finally saw the email, I sent an email that, look, I'm not in a mental state of designing anything at the moment because we are not really in a good place in this country. So people are dying, and so many things are happening at this moment. So I think, and after that we had a small call and conversation. Well, finally, of course, this this commission happened, which was really nice, and thank you for this. But at the same time, I think when we started thinking about this pavilion, it has a very interesting way that this has been created over time. This whole notion of a pavilion, but it's there for a certain period of time. It's here from, let's say, June to October, and then it's packed up and going somewhere else, right? And so this really interested me, that a pavilion, and since we've been working with temporality, which is indefinite temporality, whereas this is a definite temporality, but at the same time it has this really interesting thing where people come together, like today we're having an event in a nice, beautiful sunny day, light coming through. This becomes a memory, it stays with you. And hopefully there will be many more of these kind of events in this space where people will come together, will have different conversations. And then I always thought that this is almost like a capsule in time where you hold these memories and then it sort of vanishes away somewhere else. Or it just has a presence in the virtual realm now that we have that. So, all those things can happen. So that's why, it is literally a capsule, as you can see, in terms of plan and everything. And these cuts actually makes it, you go through, you see the spaces all around you, see the park through it. The park comes into the space as the wind is flowing, the light coming through. So I think, that's what was going through our mind. But when we started designing, it was also the afterlife. That's what we were thinking of at the same time, that, it's here for a certain period of time, but then the afterlife is also an important part. Where will it go? How will it be used? So our aspiration is that it should turn into a library, and it would be a beautiful library if we can turn it into a library. So let's see where it goes.
It already is a little bit of a library. If after the talk you have time, you will find some of Marina's favorite books already installed near the cafe, and obviously the library is gonna grow. Now, in terms of the sculptural kind of quality of this farm, you often spoke about the architectural language of Shamiana tents and their relationship, actually, their important relationship to Bangladesh and South Asia culture. Can you talk a little bit about how that entered the pavilion?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, that I'm always interested in the typology. And so if we talk about pavilion structure in our own landscape, we have these shamianas. And this goes back long. I think they have a history that goes back far. And it's always about creating a space which is made out of fabric, with bamboo structure, and then covering with fabric, and the facade is also made out of fabric, and quite often for weddings, for religious events. So growing up as a child, whenever we had a wedding or even a larger, let's say religious gathering like prayers, you would go to a space which is covered by this fabric, beautiful light coming through that, quite often very colorful, very ornate also. So, that's a memory that I hold, and that light coming through that space has always been very atmospheric also. So I thought, I cannot bring a shamiana here, wouldn't be appropriate, but if I could do something with light. So that's why these panels that you see, which is sort of a zigzagging, has these different colors, muted colors, that actually complements the warmth of the sunlight and daylight. So to bring that together and then to create this, sort of atmosphere which is about light, was something more of an abstract representation of my own experience of being under these spaces.
And the pavilion draws on the language of, your previous works. We talked about the mosque, the Bait ul-Uruf mosque already, and the kind of interplay of light and shadow, which certainly connects it to that. But there's another connection which I think is very interesting, which is this communal living and also the celebration in courtyards, which we can find in another important project of yours, the Panigram Eco Resort and Spa in Yashore, which you completed in 2018. Can you maybe tell us about this connection and these courtyards?
Yeah, I think most of my works have a certain kind of a space which I think is the soul of the building or the anything that I'm creating. So for this pavilion, I think that ginkgo tree and that open space is that space where you can actually come together and just stand underneath it. The tree also gives you a certain sort of scale to that space, because it is, after all, quite a monumental in that sense of its grandeur and generosity of the height and the space. Probably the biggest pavilion ever built, right? Also with maybe not the height, but the space also. So it was nice to create that central space where people can actually come together. And in most cases, I think every building has a soul, as a space, as a soul. And for me, the courtyard is always that space which actually generates that soul of a place. the spirit of the place, you can say.
Thank you. I want to talk also about the materials, because you have embraced non-engineered timber, and in a way it's the first time you've done that at this scale. And of course that also means again that it can be reused. Can you tell us about the choice of materials?
Yeah, so at the moment here we've used glulam, which is like laminated wood, and it's bent according to the diameter as required. The reason for using wood was also the fact that it will travel or find a home somewhere, and so the dry construction and how you can actually build it here at the low foundation and then take it out and then move it to a different location. So it's also again coming out of Kudibari, but it's a much larger, big bari in that sense. But the idea was also with the same thing, that you can dismantle it and take it to a separate location. So basically the wooden structure, of course for me, first time working with wood, because wood for us is not really a material. We don't build with wood as much. Our material is generally brick, and we make concrete and brick structures in most of the cases, so it's always a different way of construction. But in this case, we used wood, and then the steel structure also holds it together, and then the panels also helps with the light and everything. So, yeah, for me, the first time making with wood.
And it is the first pavilion which moves, because actually last night it suddenly started to rain, and then magically these two elements here came together and we had a protected space. That idea of a pavilion on the move has been always in conversation since the beginning. I remember many conversations with the late Cedric Price, who talked. He, of course, designed the aviary, one of my favorite buildings in London, the aviary with Frank Newby and Lord Snowdon in the London Zoo. And the idea is actually that that building can move in the wind. I mean, initially, that's unrealized. Cedric Price wanted that building to even be mobile, so that the birds could fly with it out of the zoo and be free. But sadly, Cedric passed away in 2005, so it was too late to actually commission him a pavilion. Then in 2006, we had the pavilion of Rem Koolhaas and Cecil Balmont, and that pavilion actually was balloon-like and could vertically, on a sunny day, could almost like fly away, but then we pulled it back with the strings. So it didn't fly away completely. But this is the very first pavilion which horizontally moves, because you're sitting here underneath the four vaulted segments of the capsule between the semi-domed walls, and it can move. Can you tell us about that idea, the kinetic dimension of your pavilion?
Yeah, I think the kinetic dimension came in because you get rain in the summer months, and so you needed a space which can actually hold about 200 people. I think here we have about 200 or a little bit more maybe, but without getting them wet. And so how do you do that? Because I wanted these cuts. I wanted people to come in. I wanted them to sort of have these apertures through which you see the tree, the wind coming through and everything. So the idea was, can we bring this part and this part together so that it can hold the people inside without getting them wet. So we created a mechanism underneath this part on both sides. And there is a switch at the back, and if you just push it, the button, it comes and connects to this portion here and gives you a space which is, without rain. So it gives you a protection. And one thing is quite interesting, which we really didn't think about, is the acoustic isn't so bad here. So that was an added advantage.
The acoustic is actually excellent, yes. And I see many young architects here with us today, and also architecture students. So I wanted to ask you, Rainer Maria Rilke wrote this beautiful book, which is an advice to a young poet. Marina, what would in 2025 be your advice to a young architect?
I think I wrote a letter. Chris is very fond of that letter that I wrote, I think, in Architecture Review. Well, my advice, I don't know if there is any advice to give, but I think it's important to understand in what time you're living in, what are the issues that are relevant of the time, and if you really want to be relevant of the time, then you really have to address the issues that are there. And being architects, our tool is architecture. Our tool is our knowledge, our ability to do things, create space, and also make ourselves available to people in many different ways. So reimagine the profession, reevaluate your position in the society, and do something that really is relevant.
Marina, thank you so much. A big round of applause for Marina Tabassum.
Well, thank you to Hans and to Marina for joining us virtually. And I want to welcome Chris back to the virtual stage. And just as a reminder for everybody joining us today, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit questions for Chris. So I'm going to get us started. Can you talk a little bit about the process of working with MTA? Were there changes across the design? And what is that collaboration like?
I mean, I think with any project, particularly the pavilion, it's not necessarily the most straightforward project. It's a very extrapolated timeline. And really, ultimately, it takes just under a year for the whole pavilion process to happen. So we invite the architect usually around this period in the summer. We appoint the architect by kind of towards the end of September, beginning of October, and then we're really working very closely or very hard on the planning application, which has to be submitted to our local council of the borough at the beginning of that following year. So this year would have been early January. And then from that moment onwards, there can be no design changes. So the design is ultimately fixed from that period. So it is an incredibly tight turnaround. Of course, we've been doing this for 24, 25 years now. And we have amazing teams and collaborators that we work with. We work with ACOM and Stage 1, our building team, and then another colleague of mine, Julie Bernal, who's worked on the pavilions for over 15 years. So they come with this kind of collective wealth and share of knowledge. And I think, it almost becomes this kind of well-oiled machine by this point. But of course, every project has its own challenges and nuances. And I think what was exciting about Marina's was that she was so clear on what she wanted. And there wasn't, massive changes that really happened to her design. It worked in so many kind of beautiful ways and with so many different kind of nuances and sensitivities. But obviously it's more of a process of refinement. Refining the use of materiality, particularly, as we saw on the video, Marina said that she hadn't ever worked with wood before.
Yeah, that was so interesting that this was her first time.
Totally. And I think for her, she often works with, she mentioned brick, but also the use of bamboo. And I think for her, it was probably more actually understanding how this materiality will be realized in a kind of building capacity. I think that was the kind of elements that we were kind of working closely with her. Refining color or the panels was quite a lengthy process, this kind of poly process where we had this kind of selection of kind of gradient colors because Marina wanted it to kind of echo this kind of summer months in Dakar, this very kind of particular use of or quality of color and light. So if you look at it, there is this subtle shift or graduation in color where it kind of moves from these very kind of earthy kind of tones towards the bottom into this kind of brighter yellows at the top. So it was really a process of refinement. I think that happens with every pavilion, but I think having that extrapolated, tight timeline has to control the project quite significantly.
Yes. What is the interplay between the architecture and the landscape architecture? Because I know Marina, she has that ginkgo tree, and kind of does that change project to project, year to year, or how does the landscape kind of get integrated?
So where the pavilion is located, it's on a lawn just outside Serpentine South, and it's kind of hugged by a few trees. We have a few catalpa trees, and within the royal parks, we're obviously this very kind of rich biodiverse habitat, and we protect the trees in this environment. So it's a very strict rule that nothing can go within a meter of those tree roots. So there is some very specific kind of elements within the project brief that architects have to abide by and what we have to abide by. But really with Marina's pavilion, there's always been this connection between architecture, ecology, and thinking about our place in the environment and the world. So for her, it was particularly important to think about bringing the inside out. And so we went to, the choice of a ginkgo was very specific to Marina. We went to a tree nursery, which is kind of north of London, about an hour away. And it was in the dead of winter, so all of these trees have no leaves. We had no idea what they were going to be, trying to do in the summer. But I think Marina had this very clear kind of vision that she wanted something that had that kind of very sculptural form, that had a presence within the pavilion, but felt like it had a presence that wasn't necessarily in the immediate environment of Serpentine South lawn. So the choice of a ginkgo, one, historically, the ginkgo tree is quite a fascinating species. One, because it's existed since the Jurassic time. So it's one of the oldest living trees in existence, and they're often used or kind of dotted around very busy kind of cities. So here within London, they're often populated on the kind of very busy thoroughfares or kind of main roads into the city of London because they hold on to pollutants. So there's this kind of multiplicity of benefits that these trees have, but also one of the other particular benefits of it specifically for the pavilion is these very kind of sculptural shaped leaves. So they're these kind of very beautiful kind of organic kind of fan-like shapes, which over the course of summer into autumn, so the pavilion is on from the summer of June until October, it will slowly shift from this kind of luminous green into this bright kind of piercing yellow. And then slowly those will fall off the tree as we enter into winter or later into autumn. So you have this kind of carpet of yellow. And I think that was also critical for Marina, is that not having something there that was speaking of ecology and all of these other things that are so crucial to her practice, but actually seeing this kind of passing of time. Because of course time is so central to the conceptual underpinning of this project. She wanted something that was able to kind of create this kind of meaningful response or present that in some way.
Well, thank you. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. We have a question from Selena. Do you invite people to submit for the pavilion, or can anybody submit their design?
We always invite people to submit designs, whether they will. We often work very closely with a committee. So this year or last year, we worked with Sue Fujimoto, who designed the pavilion in 2013. And so he works as an advisor. And then together with the artistic director, Hans Ulrich, and our CEO, Bettina Korek, alongside Julie Bernal, who's our head of buildings and special projects, and then the curator of the project, we all kind of do our own research into specific architectural practices that we're interested in or kind of doing exciting things. And then we will usually make a very long list, which is then shortened down over a period of a couple of months. And then we will send an invitation to architects to submit a proposal. And there's been some instances where we may have gone back to architects several times or have invited new practices or firms to submit proposals. But it's quite a very kind of short turnaround and time frame. It's obviously very intense for the architect as well, submitting a proposal and then having to work on realizing this commission within 6 months ultimately with the planning application. But it's quite a straightforward kind of process, or the brief is relatively straightforward in that sense.
Going back to Marina's design, what are the, and Pedro has a question, what are the dimensions of the capsule, and how long did it take to install? So what is the installation process like?
So installation is, we break ground in April. So it usually takes about 60 days from building the foundations up till opening the private view night. And it's kind of this amazing moment actually with the pavilion, because our offices look down onto the lawn. So every day you can see the progress of the building on a daily basis. And it's kind of incredible to see how quickly the building kind of completely changes or takes shape over, a day or 2 days. You go away for a week and suddenly it's completely radically different. In terms of the buildings or the pavilion's dimensions, this is not fully accurate, but it's around 8 meters high. And then it's about 20 meters kind of lengthwise.
In the video, Marina mentioned that it maybe was one of the bigger pavilions that you all have done.
Well, what's interesting with Marina's, and I think this is for the first time within the pavilion history, is that she's kind of changed the orientation of the pavilion. And in this way, where it's this kind of north-south axis of the gardens, or of Kensington Gardens. So, and this kind of elongated form kind of creates this amazing kind of dialogue between the kind of main road that runs through the gardens, and then also this connection to the to the south. But I think, as Marina said, I think is one of the largest. And it it has this kind of grandeur when you kind of enter that space. And I think that was critical with Marina's work, this kind of, Marina often thinks about, she always says she designs with feeling. And I think for her, she always, thinks about how does someone kind of enter those spaces that she's building, and whether that be she's thinking from anything of, where's that entry point, the way that you enter into that main space. She mentioned about courtyards being the kind of soul of any building. She thinks of all of those elements. And she was speaking when she was here in London, when we were sat in the pavilion together, there's perimeter seating that run around the whole of the pavilion. And I said, what's interesting about that, because it was something that I didn't anticipate, is that you are almost in dialogue with anyone that's in there. Despite you having this distance between one another, you almost have this kind of proximity. She said, yeah, I knew that. That's exactly why I designed it. I wanted
that was on purpose.
And so there is this kind of amazing kind of elements that kind of come out within her work. But I think she just knew exactly what that space was going to be, and how you would feel when you kind of enter that space.
Speaking of the audience engagement, this being the first moving kinetic pavilion, from a curatorial standpoint, what new programming or audience behaviors does this flexibility enable?
Very interesting. As of course, being in London, there is a huge amount of rain, although today we are having an amazing summer. It's like 32 degrees, which is beautiful and unexpected for London. But I think what's amazing about it is that there is this very subtle shift in the spatial configuration of the pavilion, where this kind of 1.5 meter gap of these kind of capsule forms is able to close. So you create this kind of more undercovered area. And of course, that allows for this more kind of flexibility, whether it be a performance program, whether it be a conversation, whether it be a hire, all of these various things, is that people then respond to the pavilion in a very different way. And I think what was interesting about that is that despite it being this very subtle shift, it kind of radically reorients itself in that space. So throughout the course of summer, we'll host our Part Night series, where artists will respond with a series of new commissions. We're hosting a family day with a series of activations, which will happen in the next week or so. We hosted a day of kind of responses to our exhibition, Our Peter Singh Remembering, which recently closed, and Marina's work, which was looking at this interconnection between those two artists from very different generations. So we brought together collectives or conversations. And I think that's what's so exciting about the pavilion, is that every pavilion has this flexibility, and it's when those, artists or thinkers or other people respond to making that space active and alive.
Maybe zooming out a little bit again, this is the 25th anniversary of the pavilion. How have you seen a change in the way that architects are approaching this commission, this project, over the past couple of years?
I mean, I think architects, and similarly to artists, they're responding to the world that they're inhabiting and living in. And I think there's a lot of running themes that come out every year. I think, there is particularly concerns for ecological crisis and collapse, thinking about materiality. I think one theme that has run through a number of years when I've been looking at previous proposals, or even the architects before, from Lina to Minzuk, is this kind of ideas of togetherness. Or connection, creating spaces of refuge. And I think that's really clear within Marina's work as well, that all of the incredible vital work that she's been doing, working with marginalized communities, those that are living on, in peril or in very precarious existences within Bangladesh. I think architects are really thinking about the expanded practice of what architecture can be. And it's not necessarily just about building buildings for the sake of building a building. And I think this is, I think Marina is such a great example of that, because I think, like Hans-Ulrich said at the beginning about Marina's father, who was a doctor, of course, a very different practice to what Marina's doing, but you can see that there is this similar kind of sensitivity or sensibility to how she works as an architect. she said that, her earliest memories was seeing her father looking after, communities that lived very closely to her. And I think for Marina, she's really thinking about who am I serving when I'm building buildings? Why am I serving them? And how can I make their lives better by architecture? And so I think, I think a lot of architects now, and I think a running theme is thinking about social practice and engagement of architecture and space building, and looking at those connections to other, hugely pressing concerns of, our times now.
Going back to the pavilion, where were the wood products and other materials sourced from? Is that something that you guys think about in terms of the production of the pavilion, not just the afterlife, but the before life of the materials?
So we often work with UK-based organisations on this, and this is partially for to contribute to our ecological concerns. And as I said, the pavilion is always, it exists on Serpentine's lawn for about 5 months, then it comes down, and it's very ephemeral and transient in London and Serpentine, but then it will find its own permanent home. So I think crucial to the materiality that we use is that it has resilience and that it can exist for longer. This isn't a project that just lasts for 5 months. It is a project that we hope will exist into many years to come. So you can see some of those buildings across, or some of those pavilions across the world, really. There's in Albania, there's Su Fujimoto's, which is outside the Tirana Art Museum. And then not Su Fujimoto, sorry. Smiljan Radic is just outside Hauser and Wirth in Somerset, in Bruton, which is probably 2 hours from London, this incredible landscape garden. So I think for us, when we're working with materials, and particularly the architects as well, they're really responding to thinking about the longevity of those materials for its lifetime elsewhere. And I think that was really crucial to Marina, actually, because I think in many ways she was thinking more about the lifetime beyond Serpentine, just as much as she was thinking about this relationship to it being in London. And you can hear a little bit about that when she said, Hans-Ulrich was saying that she is conceiving this as this kind of library space with this kind of multi-purpose. So she was really thinking about, the importance of materiality and longevity and life beyond us.
Great. I think this will be maybe our last question of the day. But what is the most unexpected feature of this pavilion?
Unexpected feature. Well, I think actually from viewing this, and I'm trying to put myself in your guys' shoes, that some of you might not have seen this before. And I think actually the pavilion feels quite simple in its form and quite simple in its kind of gestures. And I think Marina and I spoke about this a lot. We painstakingly chose those colors on Zoom calls. I was showing pictures of what the light was doing it to, and this was all super vital to Marina's kind of understanding of it. She uses light in a way that almost becomes a building element in its own right, in the same way that she would employ brick or wood in this case. And I think what the most surprising thing with this is that every time you enter that space, it's radically different. The ways in which the sun hits the space, where the position of the sun is, the ways in which the shadows are cast throughout the space, is always different every time you enter in there. So I think that was, one particularly surprising moment, but also something that's hugely exciting, because I think we have lots of visitors that keep coming back, and hopefully they're discovering something new when they enter that space.
Okay, we do have some last minute questions. So that wasn't the last question. We have, seeing as Marina's pavilion imagines itself as a library and last year's pavilion incorporating music and sound installations, do you see a trend in moving towards this multidisciplinary thinking, or has this always been the case? What do you see as the value of this interdisciplinary approach?
That's a big question. And I think, there is this, I think we can also think this within the context of contemporary art and artists, is that there's no longer this binary between art forms. There's artists that are painters, there's artists that work with painting and music or film. And I think we at Serpentine try to really embrace that. And I think particularly with architecture and architects, they're thinking about they're not just thinking about the built form, right? They're thinking about it and how it occupies space, how individuals engage with that space. So I think it's inevitable that they start thinking about ways in which they can cultivate that space, or think about how that space could be activated or used. And I think that, of course, Minsuk had a library within his that was very much an artist project. That's where he invited an artist to bring to a collection of unread books, whereas Marina wasn't really thinking about that in the same way. She was really taking her own position as a Bengali woman coming from Dhaka and Bangladesh at times of kind of political crisis within the country. And she was really thinking about, ideas of censorship. She was thinking about, an era in which it was seen by, which is defined by information overload. And she was thinking about how she can think about this space as this kind of porous but also generous, in this kind of versatile space that could open up ways for connection, for learning, for dialogue, for knowledge exchange. And within that, of course, she has decided to bring together a collection of Bengali literature, predominantly literature, poetry, texts on ecology, politics, culture, anything that really informs or shapes her practice. So together with her studio team, they put together this incredible list of writings, which all draw on certain elements of Marina's practice and touches really on the ways in which that Marina approaches her projects. These projects don't just happen within a night or, a week or so, often they, take years of research, and all of Marina's projects start with this very intense period of research, whether that be looking at the kind of context in which she's building or the culture that she's kind of working within, but also engaging with scientists, with ecologists, to other thinkers that will inform or shape her approach to that specific project.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I think that's a great note to end on today. I want to thank Chris. Thank you so much for joining us today, and to Hans and Marina for virtually joining us earlier, and to all of you for joining us today during the day on the East Coast, and maybe at a different time of day, wherever you are. And we hope that you'll stay tuned for more Travel Twos with Bloomberg Connects, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.